G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a brilliant weekend. By the time this video comes out, well, I might be a little bit dusty. I've got a big bash for my 30th birthday on tonight. We're filming this video in the morning with SAC, of course, Strategy and Analysis Centre. Mate, welcome back to the channel.
Salutations and thanks for having me on.
Mate, no, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for being here. And of course, we've introduced you before, but just quickly, this gentleman that I have on, of course, you can't see his face. We won't say his name, but he spent 30 years across military contract, private intelligence, a sector around shaping, influencing larger strategic picture. So, mate, thank you very much for being, well, I was going to say a common face, but on my channel a lot. So today we are going to be breaking a lot down over the first 2 weeks. The reason SAC and I today are doing this podcast, this discussion is, well, today marks, well, the 15th day, but we're going to cover the first 2 weeks, the first fortnight of this war. Have you ever hesitated to connect to a public Wi-Fi at a cafe, a hotel, or an airport, worried that someone could access your data? I travel a lot, and this is always a concern. Well, that was until I started using today's video sponsor, CyberGhost VPN. CyberGhost encrypts your connection and hides your IP address, keeping your browsing private from internet providers, public networks, and even websites that may track you. With over 38 million users and a strong Trustpilot rating, it's one of the most trusted VPNs on the market. You can run it on up to 7 devices simultaneously: your phone, your laptop, your tablet, your desktop. You can even share it with your family, so they are all secure. It unlocks regional content, whether it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime or Disney, which means Lily and I, we could watch the same show even while I'm traveling. By using the link in the description, you can get their best deal ever. Just $2.03 a month. 4 months for free. That's 84% off with a 45-day money-back guarantee. So you've got nothing to lose. Sign up through the link and help us keep making videos. Now, let's get back to it. We will be breaking this down into 3 subheadings of military, political, and economic. You could separate those 2 if you'd like, and then overall strategic picture. Now, those who follow my channel, we have a very Clausewitzian idea of war is politics by other means. So you'll understand that separating military from strategy to political and economic in war, it's not perfect because, of course, these have all massive amounts of overlap. So what we'll be doing is we'll be talking about specifics and then we'll bring that all together in a bigger picture. Mate, how does that sound?
That sounds excellent. And just to start, a note for everybody that while Willie and I obviously try to find the most accurate and reliable information, the quality of some AI deepfakes is so good that it can be easy for anyone who's looking at this in a great deal of depth and detail can be misled. So we always try and make sure we're not waylaid by AI deepfakes, but it can happen.
Oh, absolutely. And us on a time frame to record, put out a video, upload it, it's very difficult. And not only time frame, AI deepfake is getting so good, and every single day it is getting better. I believe that you and I, and this is on my notes to address first off, we may have got something wrong last time with a deepfake from the Indian Minister of Defence.
Yeah, it was the general, the Indian Chief of the Army Staff.
Chief of Army Staff, yep.
Yeah, so that may or may not. There's because deepfakes can be so accurate, it can be easily to make mistakes, and that could have been one of them. We've got to address that and acknowledge that and put our hands up. But if we do that, that's important.
Absolutely. And you and I, we will get things wrong. Please let us know, and we will endeavour to address any mistakes as early as we can. Even on the deep fakes, there's a lot of people that think the recent videos of Bibi Netanyahu, people are looking and going, hey, look, this frame has a 6th finger in it. And that's very common for AI. And stepping into the future, guys, AI is terrifying. It would be completely able at this point in time to copy my face, your voice, and upload something online, let alone a world leader with significantly more speeches, videos, etc. online. So we will do our absolute best. Mate, look, I'll let you kick it off. We're going to start with military. So we'll start with military, then we'll talk politics, economics, which is sort of a own subheading. They're not really separate. And then overall strategic news considerations. But let's start with military. What have you got that you see as the really big ticket items?
Well, we've got the KC-135, so airborne and aerial refueling aircraft crash, and another one damaged. So these are extremely important critical enablers for strike aircraft and long-range bombers. So the loss of one is actually significant. Now, the story at the moment is it was not due to hostile fire, and that's entirely plausible. One of the things is with increased, high tempo combat operations, you can lead to more accidents than you would have during exercises. And then there's wear and tear through overuse of airframe. So it could entirely possible that it was not due to hostile fire and it was just an accident. But the loss of one and the damage to another is quite significant. Not as capability significant, but still worthy of comment is there's reports of a fire aboard the USS Gerald R. Ford. Now, again, not due to hostile fire. I think it was in the laundry system, but it's important when we hear these things that we go, okay, yes, there is a fire, but it's not actually due to hostile action. Royal Australian Air Force, a E-7 Wedgetail airborne early warning and control aircraft is to deploy to the UAE. That's extremely significant. And Australia is also to provide AIM-120 MRAM air-to-air missiles to the UAE. So that's important. And we may talk later about, in the broader picture, about cooperative engagement, which we can talk about now or later at your choice. And of course, we had
do you mind just giving us a quick briefing on, I guess, what a wedge-tail can do?
Right. So people will probably be familiar with the term an AWAC, E3 Sentry. AWAC's been around for a long time, the standard for airborne early warning and control. So it's a huge radar in the sky. It has long-range tracking of anything in the sky, not just aircraft, cruise missiles. And then it takes all that information in and passes it off to other systems, other aircraft or ground-based air defence to then target or to engage these targets. So it's a giant airborne radar. Now, the E-7 Wedgetail, which is a newer technology, not only can it do that in the air, it can also map ground targets, moving ground targets, electronic emitters on the ground. So it also works in electronic intelligence. So it's a very capable intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capability. And Australia has now sent one, or is sending one, to the UAE. Now, I talked about cooperative engagement. So a scenario can be that this Australian airborne early warning and control aircraft picks up an Iranian cruise missile or drone, sends that information to a UAE fighter, let's say an F-16, which then fires one of these Australian AMRAAMs at the target to take it out. So it's a system of systems where you pass information to another system to actually engage. So we could certainly see that as a scenario. So these are very important. We talked about critical enablers before, airborne refueling aircraft, the tanker, the KC-135. Well, the AWACS, or here an AEW&C aircraft, is even more important.
Absolutely. And we saw the importance of these aircraft. Of course, the equivalent on the Russian side is a A-50, or the newer variant of the A-100. We have seen this as an enabler for aircraft flying in both in Russia and occupied territories for strikes. And also, this actually became very clear in the skirmish between India and Pakistan of sending the information from the Pakistani AWACS aircraft to the Indian fighters to then be able to engage, to then the Pakistani fighters to be able to engage then the Indian fighters. Of course, not only an incredibly important and expensive asset, but an asset of even the largest great states having very limited numbers.
Yeah, exactly. Losing one of those would be very significant.
Absolutely.
So then moving on, we've got of course, a THAAD and potentially some Patriots moving from US forces Korea to the Middle East. Then we have the Iranian mining of the Persian Gulf. Well, a lot's been said about this, but I'm yet to see any concrete evidence that this has actually happened.
Well, there's two points to extend on your 2 points there. Is we have footage of a THAAD being disassembled. Now, there has been some speculation on whether that is the complete THAAD system being moved or some parts being moved to send to damaged weapon systems in the Middle East. But then we do have then security camera street footage of 3 different vehicles, part of the THAAD moving in Korea. And something you may be able to expand on more is, well, Korea paid a pretty high price to have that system of deterrence, that system of defense within the Republic of Korea from China. China was really not happy about that. And now the Americans are pulling up that system along with other Patriots to send it out of the area they've already paid the price on into then the Middle East.
So, yes, in terms of capability, there's nothing else like that in South Korea. South Korea doesn't have a domestic analog of that. So that's a significant capability that is being removed. But that is really there primarily against a North Korean threat. Yes, certainly if China was involved and Chinese ballistic missiles were involved, it would be employed, of course. But it's really there for the North Korean threat. So for the US to remove it, it's either that they think the likelihood of a North Korean strike is extremely low, which I would agree with that, or the threat in the Middle East is just so significant that they had to take the risk. Now, you talk about maybe not the complete system. At the very least, we should expect the radars, because we have evidence of the THAAD radars in the theatre being taken out. So we should expect at least the radars. And as I've mentioned in our last discussion, without the radars, the THAAD missiles really are ineffective.
Yes.
So I think we look at the bigger picture of, can we remove this capability to another theatre, and the assessment of the likelihood of conflict on the Korean Peninsula, I'd suggest, is very low.
Very low, but we do know there was a lot of political and economic fallout did come with systems like that being deployed into these areas too, specifically from other powers, but primarily China, to do with some of these systems. Of course, yes, it's against a North Korean threat, but American influence in this area and cuddling up more to the Americans, as always, further flow-on effect from, of course, the great state hegemon within Asia. And that sea mines, there's a whole another element to this, is not only the potential of it being mined, which, there's still no evidence of, but also the lack of ability to actually be able to employ mine sweepers into the area too, to potentially clear the mines. It's going to be a very dangerous task, and there's a very limited capability of mine sweepers also.
Yeah, something that the US did have some more traditional mine warfare, mine sweeping, mine clearing vessels, but they were moved out late last year, and I think now they're going to rely upon the littoral combat vessels, LCS, littoral combat ships, to conduct that sort of operation. But then you don't want to be trying to clear mines while you're worried about getting hit by a drone or a unmanned surface vessel, which we know have been employed against tankers in the Gulf. So it's going to be very difficult. They need a very permissive environment for the mine clearing vessels to operate, and this is just going to take a lot of time.
And well, let's talk about those sea drones, because we've seen, I believe the figure, I think, is 18. I could be incorrect. On 18 ships now have been struck in and around this area of operations. Of course, not just the Strait of Hormuz, Persian Gulf. We've also seen down off the coast of Oman as well. We do see that sea drones, as well as other systems, are actively striking ships, as the US on the opening days of this promised that if this is closed, we will escort ships through. We spoke about the incredible danger of this. We have had, apparently there's daily requests to America to escort ships in or out of the Persian Gulf and, of course, into the wider sea lanes. And so far, every request has been denied by the Navy. And that gives us an idea of these captains or the senior officers and what they are assessing as the real threat of moving even an armed ship through these narrow lanes.
Oh yeah, and these sea drones even off the coast, right at the northern end of the Gulf, off Iraq. So it's the full length of the Gulf. Ships are at risk, and we saw how haven't seen it recently, how successful these were employed by Ukraine in the Black Sea.
Yeah, and this is what I say about people with a short memory, is everyone loves to, and especially Big Don in the White House loves to, Iran has no navy, blah, 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 blah. It's like, well, okay, look at a country that essentially has no navy. I know Ukraine has a couple of ships that were built in Turkey, etc., but essentially has no navy. They scuttled their navy ships on day one. Of course, it's ships, if you will call them. They have some boats, but ships. And, well, look at what has happened in the Black Sea with multiple ships, including some of their pride ships of the Russians going down in an area of which is nowhere near as narrow, as tight, or as vulnerable as this strait. And at the end of the day, these ships have very little experience going up against a weapon system like this and have very little kill systems against a swarm of drones like this.
Yeah, I think that's a good analog. Even when the US achieves total air superiority over, especially the broader strait area, and Iran has no surface vessels of any sort of size, Iran will still have midget submarines. It will still have its fast speedboats, which are very small targets that carry anti-ship missiles. It will still have its land-based anti-ship missile capability. So Iran can have no surface fleet of effect. I'm not talking about speedboats. It can have no air force, but Iran could still threaten vessels going through the strait.
Absolutely. And we know this strait, this is being spoken about absolutely daily. And Trump today, he's made a whole truth.com speech about this. And as well, we're getting more and more information sort of coming through that Karg Island, which sits sort of right up in the northwest of the Gulf, of course, beyond the strait, that America is targeting the hell out of that, and a lot more limited information, but rumors that there's going to be some level of ground operation onto that island. You and I have spoken about this before. This is where a lot of Iranian oil is pumped out to the island and then into ships to go. So I just want to read the tweet from Trump. Of course, there's a lot in this, but my direction: the US Central Command executed one of the most powerful bombing raids in history of the Middle East and totally obliterated every military target in Iran's crown jewel, Karg Island. Our weapons are the most powerful and sophisticated that the world has ever known, but for reason of decency, I'm not to wipe out the oil infrastructure on the island. However, should Iran or anyone else do anything to interfere with the free and safe passage of ships through the Strait of Hormuz, I'll immediately reconsider this decision. So I haven't targeted the oil structure on the island, but I have wiped out every military target. His claims here. We know, of course, Trump makes a lot of claims, even down to that China doesn't use any wind energy recently. But if they are to interfere with any of the passage of these ships, and well, therefore we will see further targeting on oil infrastructure. Can you give us an idea of what the targeting of this infrastructure may have flow-on effect, and of course the reliance of other states on that infrastructure on Karg Island?
Right, so Karg Island is the export terminal for about 90% or something like that, almost the total, 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. I mentioned previously there is another facility outside, Iranian facility outside of the Straits, which can handle a small amount, so about 10% at most. But Karg Island, of course, central to or critical. Without that, Iran effectively isn't exporting oil. So Karg Island itself, if you look at it, it's fairly barren. There's not a lot of areas where to prevent cover and concealment. If you don't want to take out the oil facilities, because we know the US doesn't, because the US wants to take advantage of that in a post-conflict scenario. So they don't want to destroy it because that's in their interest. The US is not doing a kindness or a gesture to Iran. It's because after the fact, as we've seen in Venezuela, they want to take advantage of Iran's crude oil export capability. But landing on the island, and we talked about that, I have no doubt that US Special Forces could insert onto the island, and especially if all of the military capability, or literally most of it, has been taken out, they could successfully take the island. Yeah, but then
there you go.
You go.
I was going to say there's been a lot of rumours about further Marines and soldiers, sailors being deployed into the area of operations. The Wall Street Journal this morning, they said there's an additional 2,500 Marines from a Marine Expeditionary Unit on the way. NBC, they've set up to 5,000 additional sailors and Marines will be entering the AO. And there's a lot of people talking about potential special forces, expeditionary units, etc., for a movement onto Karg Island. But of course, once you commit ground forces, well, that does really change the nature of this war and likely the time frame of this also.
It does. But I'd suggest to people who are sort of even half interested in this to get a map out and look at for the Marines, a Marine Expeditionary Unit. If it's a full unit, about 5,000 troops, how they sail through the Straits of Hormuz all the way up to Karg Island, if that's for Karg Island. So Special Forces, that's a bit different. They can deploy from, say, Kuwait, southern Iraq. But for the Marines, they're coming by ship. So they'll have to transit essentially the whole of the Persian Gulf to get to Karg Island. I don't see, if the Marines are to be used in an amphibious assault, and that would have to be done in a very permissive environment, that they would be for Karg Island. Maybe after it's been taken, and if they feel that the situation there can be controlled, because US forces on the island will start to be attrited by the Iranians through drones, cruise missiles. So that would even need ballistic missiles for that range, and potentially even artillery. So the risk of special forces on Karg Island is that they would be attrited. So the Marines to get there, that would have to be way after the situation has calmed down and become very permissive. Otherwise, those ships, the Marine amphibious force, transiting the whole of the Persian Gulf, will be at continual risk from Iranian anti-ship missiles. Absolutely. So perhaps they're going to be used somewhere else.
Absolutely, and then this is something you and I spoke about when we spoke of Karg Island and potential movement of ground forces onto it, is a similarity to, I guess, Snake Island, of what we saw both Russia and Ukraine hold at different points in the war, and the ability to target and attrit. And of course, you're landing guys on there by helicopter, by canopy, that the amount of actual heavy systems that you're dropping is incredibly limited, down to, guys and packs and some tactical level equipment, but you're not dropping in Patriot systems upon the Karg Island. So it'll be very interesting to see how that actually unfolds. Just staying on the military front, we've seen that the Pentagon has said to Congress 2 days ago that so far the cost of this, including the replacement of systems, is now at $11.3 billion. Given that was a couple of days ago, that's probably more now, near 12 to 13 billion, just to give you an idea of the actual cost of operations like this. And it's just to having thousands upon thousands of sailors, Marines, airmen in the air of operations. How much they get paid, they have to eat. The ships, you have 3 carrier groups out there. They're incredibly expensive. You lose KC-130, you lose a couple of F-15s. This does really start racking up, and we know the cost of some of these operations in the Middle East in the past decades has cost, well, out of the B's into the trillions. We have heard a lot about, and it's sort of gone quiet now, the FBI and everyone sharing this about that there was going to be an attack on California by Iranian drones coming off a ship. And I think everyone said, do your false flag attacks better next time. And then we've seen, I believe it was 4, but I may be incorrect on that number, but a number of drones stolen from an American military base.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about false flags, and that was something we were going to do a discussion on at some stage, more broadly. But absolutely, we should expect that. Well, we've already seen that with the attack on the Iranian Aramco oil facility, which was blamed on Iran but was actually done by Israel. So we already have examples of this, and we know sides are going to do it, and it's more likely that US and Israel would do it rather than Iran. I'd have to think about a scenario where Iran would conduct a false flag, but it's certainly possible. But certainly we know Israel has, and we could see the US doing that to garner more domestic support for the war. So it's entirely plausible. But most people would see through a drone attack on California as being a false flag.
People have really woken up to the propaganda and false flags, and it's going to be a lot more difficult to pull off successfully in this day and age than it was previously. And of course, we do know. I don't know any country that's carried out more false flags than Israel. You have everything from the Levant affair, the USS Liberty. You've got many, and ones that are more speculative that people may bring up as well. The only time I could see Iran carrying out a false flag would potentially be against desalination, because that is the Achilles heel of the whole Gulf, and every state is the desalination plants. But at this point in time, I can't see it being worth it for them, because of course, well, then you're going to be struck. But that would be one of the things I'd be looking at to see. But of course, there's always set a precedent on this too, that if then you start striking theirs, they've struck yours, false flags. It's a little bit like this oil. I think in the opening 48 hours, I think I said that when we see things get desperate, we'll do the Iran lights it up. And this could be Karg Island. If you see that, then the Americans take Karg Island and occupy that island as an expeditionary unit force, well, you may see Iran targeting their own oil facilities there, as well as a more systematic targeting of oil facilities. At the moment, yes, we have seen several ships be struck. We have seen some oil depots be struck, but we haven't seen complete oil fields just bellowing out oil on fire outside of Iran. Yet, of course, we saw that massive one in Tehran, which it sounds like the Americans weren't too happy about the Israeli targeting of that. But of course, everything comes with a consequence.
I think you'll see, first of all, I agree on the desalination plant as a potential Iranian false flag. Yeah, I could see that as perhaps the most likely, but not likely to happen soon, but that's certainly possible. I think Iran is being very careful and trying not to target, or not in any critical way, the Gulf states' oil facilities. What we should be looking at is more and more strikes on Israel's Haifa facility, which is, I think it's only, or far and away, its major oil refining capability. So we should expect to see Iran continuing to strike Haifa, in particular the oil infrastructure there, in retaliation for what's happening in Iran. I think taking out that in Israel would be extremely significant for Israel.
Yeah, Haifa too is the primary port up in the north of the country. And who's followed me for a while, I was staying in Haifa for a number of months. Another area that is being targeted in Haifa is there is a big concrete plant there that supplies, I believe, upwards of 85% of concrete in Israel. And there's been a lot of reports. Of course, any imagery coming out of Israel is all being suppressed at the moment. But there is a lot of reports of targeting of that facility. And I guess this can lead us into the next part of, I guess, parts that are more economic, political, strategic. Is there's a lot sorry, you go.
Just before we do go, just to very quickly, the French carrier now has arrived in the Eastern Mediterranean, and there were reports of the Royal Navy sending an aircraft carrier, but that's not happening as of today. So just to finish off, French carrier's arrived, but the British carrier is not going.
Well, before I move on, what are they saying about the British carrier? Has it run out of tea and biscuits already?
No, they haven't said it's not able, although both, especially the Prince of Wales, has had lots of trouble. No, they've just said it's not deploying to the Middle East as of today.
Yeah, is it still deploying? It might be into the Med?
No, not to the Med. I think they said it would still deploy to the North Atlantic for an operation.
Yeah, right.
But it's a bit fluctuating.
One more thing on this, because I know you track this very closely. Have we seen any further support from Russia or China? At the moment, it's been very passive, very minimal, down to likely just imagery and some intelligence and surveillance. Have we seen any more of that pop up?
I haven't seen anything more that changes our discussion and assessment from previous chats. Nothing more or nothing less.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the big unknowns, is how much support there may be. Of course, when we talk on political economics, you talk about Cargo Island, America potentially then occupying that. 90% of oil comes from there. China has a big interest in that oil. And, well, what we don't know is, if we don't know if there's been systems, your higher-end systems, either Iranian domestic systems or potentially given systems, that haven't been bought out yet. And this is the thing, is if you want to look at strategy, even if you agree or disagree with the states, you have to put yourself in the shoes of a high-end colonel, general, etc. What would you do? And if I was looking back at the 12-day war, I would go, our missiles, the longer the war went on, the more success they started to have. In the beginning, they had very little. At the end, they had far more. Degrade the air defences and then start striking higher-end targets with your higher-end systems. And I think there is a real chance we'll start seeing higher-end Iranian systems at larger numbers. We know they still have a lot of launches. Has it been severely degraded? Yes, but they still do have the ability to launch. And there is a potential at that point we may see, potentially, I think it's unlikely, but there's potential we may see systems potentially from a state like China or Russia. Because remember, with Ukraine, the precedent has been set that you can deliver hundreds of billions of dollars to arms, direct targeting information, direct surveillance, direct espionage to a state, and that doesn't make you party to the conflict. And I guarantee they're going to be working on that precedent if more is delivered. And that would change the very nature of the whole strategic and operational picture. What I was going to say before is about the amount of censorship. There is a huge amount of censorship. So very little imagery coming out of Israel. Of course, Iran's internet has been really in a blackout. We know the satellite company Planet Labs, they have put a 14-day delay on any imagery. And we do know, of course, Twitter is massively throttling the algorithm for anything that is not really in Israel's favour. That is highly clear and actually defeats sort of the whole purpose of Mr. Musk's platform. And so, from my experience, so is YouTube. So we need to take that into account. But also, this war, the way I'm seeing it, is it's not really going in the direction of what the US was hoping. And we see on the political front, we see a lot more appealing from the US and from Israel, appealing to Iranians to rise up. Netanyahu's office, they were making tweets. They're directly appealing to Iranians to rise up against the regime, that now is your time to rise up. You're never going to have a better opportunity. We're seeing this from Netanyahu's office. We're seeing it from the IDF. We're seeing it from the Americans. Lindsey Graham, he has said, if the regime in Iran still stands when this is over, we've made a mistake. Mate, on that front, on that political front, do you see more of this appealing to try and get an organic overthrow on the government? And are you seeing anything that may suggest that's what we could see?
Oh, no, absolutely. This is trying to incite domestic Iranian forces or groups to rise up, and therefore cause enough friction that, one, it's visible for the propaganda or shaping influencing, but then it's also draws security forces away from other tasks. Rather than guarding a certain facility, they may have to be deployed. This is the IRCG and the militia to then move to quell domestic uprisings. Therefore, they're taking away from other defending or protecting other facilities. So it's double faceted. I have not seen any of that. Actually, to the contrary, we just saw images in the past few days. It was a Quds Day. Quds, I can't pronounce it properly. Quds Day, I think. And you had the Kazakian and Larijani walking in the street with masses of Iranian people during the middle of a conflict, obviously not worried about being taken out. You may or may not have seen those videos.
Yes, no, I did see that. We see it again today with is it Jerusalem Day? We see
Yeah,
massive. Oh, that's the same.
yeah, Quds is Jerusalem Day.
Apologies. We see, massive demonstrations on pro-regime. And in my opinion, I think the White House is in a bit of a flat spin. I think the White House is in a bit of a panic that this is not going the way of which some advisors may have promised it would have, but we have inklings that most advisors or military generals said that it wouldn't. We know there's a lot of information that Fed's going, hey, look, this is unlikely to work. Regime change is unbelievably difficult anyway, especially when you have strong ideologies involved, especially when you then decapitate or circumcise their leader. It's never really been done from strategic air campaign. There's potentially one example in Yugoslavia, but most of that is due to banking more so than the strikes. And even with ground forces, it's unbelievably difficult to do. I did a whole video on regime change, success, failure in counterinsurgency warfare. It's incredibly difficult to do. But I think there may have been an element of reinforced opinions of agreement that, yes, this is exactly what we are going to do. This is going to work in this way. And I think the White House is in a bit of a flat spin. And I think another fortnight time, you remember, the original time frame given was 4 weeks. And I know that Mr. Hegseth in his infinite wisdom has come out and said, we'll reduce that, we'll increase that, we'll do whatever we've done. And his ChatGPT-esque speeches. But at 4-week mark, if we go another fortnight and things haven't changed, there's going to be unbelievable pressure from the media, from Congress, from many others of, well, this is the original time frame that you have given. What real results are we actually seeing on the ground? And Senator Blumenthal, he came out and he said that after his briefings, he said the US, we are on a path to ground forces on the ground to boots on. We are on the path, to boots on the ground.
So on that about the air campaign by itself, the SACEUR, so Supreme Allied Commander Europe, so the US head of European Command, an Air Force, a 4-star, has said when you look at history, there is no example where air power alone has achieved what the US objectives are. Professor Mearsheimer has also said the same thing. So there is no example. People might point to the dropping of the atomic bombs, but they were atomic bombs. You could do that now with a land-based system. Yes, they fly through the air, but air power alone has not achieved the strategic victory. And in Serbia, it was when the Serbians pulled out, they found out the BDA, the battle damage assessment, wasn't as significant as they had thought, and they really pulled out because Russia was going to withdraw that economic support that was keeping Serbia in the fight. So even that really wasn't. So there isn't an example at nuclear bombs over Japan in World War II aside.
Yeah, and the nuclear bombs over Japan in World War II was the war was really wrapping up anyway. You had, of course, the Soviet Union coming off a two-front into what would have been a single-front war, and well, a nuclear weapon. Yeah, it may be then the only way to do this, but I tell you, the fallout from that, both literally and figuratively, would be insane. And I know you disagree with me a little bit on this point. And now I have no, I don't think that we'd ever see Israel use a nuclear weapon in this war, except if it became existential for them. But I think we could be moving closer to seeing America potentially use a weapon system like this if they can't get their desired outcome. And that doesn't mean that it's a large megatonnage weapon on Tehran. It may be more something like a nuclear penetrating system, because there's a lot of reports today that the enriched uranium has been moved. We know that was in, potentially between Fordow and Natanz, which we were told was obliterated, to use the term the White House used, and said if you suggest otherwise, then you are part of fake news. But we know Fordow was significantly deeper than what we believe the mass ordnance penetrator dropped from those B-52s on the 12-day water to basically, near the end of that. We know those likely can't penetrate to the depth of some of the areas. Now, it doesn't mean a lot of the centrifuges and halls weren't destroyed by them, but we know from Mr. Grossi, the head of the IAEA, who was there when Iran, unlike another belligerent in this war, hasn't had IAEA inspectors, when Iran did have them, that he said there's a lot of areas in this facility far deeper than the depth that you are quoting. But what I'm saying on this penetrator is we're getting reports that Iran has moved a lot of this facility to Pickaxe Mountain. Now, these are areas of which we believed were under construction, under development, and are significantly deeper than the other facilities, and likely untouchable from much other than potentially nuclear penetrators or higher weapon systems. Potentially some have rumoured something that works like a Russian Otoshnik to send basically an earthquake through the ground instead of an actual penetrator to collapse areas. If you have any more thoughts, or have you seen anything on that?
Well, I'll give you some points to think about. And I mentioned this one point last time, about 450 kilograms of material. I would be separating that into at least 2, if not 3, let's say, separate storage amounts. That's the first point. Second point, why there's an argument not to store it in one of these extremely survivable locations, because you know they would be targeted. So perhaps store it somewhere that the US may not think it's stored, because the immediate reaction will be, let's go for these facilities that we know of, which are very survivable, and store it somewhere else.
Yeah,
and play a bit of whack-a-mole.
If you just put it in Muhammad's house somewhere, it's going to be far less pop up on a radar than in a facility that satellite imagery has shown being built for an amount of time.
That sort of thing.
Yeah,
that sort of thing. So that's one thing to think about. And getting back to that's on that particular point. Getting back to the US using nuclear weapons. Yes, that's not beyond the realms if the situation is dragging on, because this is not in it's not in anyone's interest, but certainly not in Donald Trump's interests. So even if the war ended tomorrow, a lot of the estimates are it would take at least 4 weeks for oil, gas, fertilizer, etc., and of course the reverse of the food and water that needs to come into the Gulf to get back to pre-war levels. So there's another month there even after peace breaks out. And it doesn't look like it's going to break out anytime soon. So the longer this goes on, the more pressure is going to be on Israel and the US. So here's a hypothetical of what the US might do, is to drop or employ a low-yield thermonuclear weapon in some unpopulated part of Iran as a demonstration. You'd be familiar with the demonstration in the military sense, where you demonstrate a capability to the enemy, not actually killing them, but showing what you can do, and therefore they go, okay, we will stop doing this or we won't do that. So I could see as a possibility the US using a low-yield nuke in an uninhabited part of Iran as a demonstration.
Well, this was exactly theorized by the Russians to demonstrate a weapon system, that they're dead serious about using that. There was a lot of theorized about that, just in an unpopulated paddock somewhere, a small, probably kiloton weapon, not a megaton weapon. And we have seen this. We have seen this with the use case of twice of the Otoshnik medium range, the IRBM, the intermediate range ballistic missile. That's absolutely what that system was primarily used for, was hey, look at this. This could target X capital in X amount of seconds. The big thing that it gets to me, and I don't want to get off in the weeds in this, so that'll be my last comment, is Trump's hubris with this war if it's not going the way. And if it goes down to, you've got 2 options. You either deploy forces, and that's going to take 6 months, because we know that's how long that it took in Iraq. It's going to take around 6 months to get enough forces to be able to do an invasion. It's going to be, then it's going to be a decade of war, a lot of blood, a lot more money. If it comes down to the options of the only way to achieve this, Donald, is commitment of troops or dropping a nuclear weapon, that decision, if that comes across the table versus walking back out and he's completely committed to this, that's what concerns me. Back to the political and economic part, probably one of the biggest, is that Spain has withdrawn a diplomat ambassador from Israel, and then of course flow-on effect from Israel and America towards Spain.
Yeah, so it's not uncommon for a country to recall an ambassador for consultations. Is normally the phrase, and that's you've got a bit of an issue with that country, so you withdraw. It's a statement, but it's more of a glossy over the facade. You pull someone back, and then later you send them back in. But Spain has permanently recalled the ambassador, so this is the most extreme act you can do in terms of recognising another state, to permanently withdraw your ambassador. And the importance of this is, well, Spain is a critical member of NATO and the EU, and it has refused US assets to use its facilities. So this is very significant in the political sense, Spain having permanently recalled its ambassador.
Oh, absolutely. And we've seen a lot of, we will continue to see ripples coming out from that stone dropped in the pond. We, of course, have how Turkey views both Israel, how Israel views Turkey, of course, a key NATO member, as well as the Kurds. And now, I guess back onto that, we don't hear anything about the Kurds anymore. We heard a lot in the beginning days. They basically said no unless you're here, so you don't hear much of that. On the economic front, we do have, today I was reading that Iran is considering tankers moving through the strait, but only if the cargo is bought and paid for in yuan, of course, Chinese renminbi. Have you been seeing anything of this?
No, I haven't seen that. That's quite interesting. We led to believe that Chinese flagged or affiliated ships, in other words, those that are going to China, even if they're not Chinese flagged, have been allowed to pass, and some Russian vessels as too, apparently. So that wouldn't surprise me. But I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. On the oil front, actually very quickly, because we'll speak about oil a little bit more, but fertilizer, this is the forgotten element that is critical through this strait, is fertilizer. For a country like Australia, which is a massive breadbasket of the world, of course, we are a massive net producer of fertilizer. I can tell you right now in Australia, there are a lot of farmers very, very concerned about the ability to get crops in the ground, keep those crops alive, not only fertilizer, but diesel. And they're saying this is a big problem. As the petrol in Australia is very, very expensive already. There's already rationing of fuel in Australia in the day 15 of this war. And fertilizer, this is something that I think is going to be a developing story. Back onto these refined products and crude products is oil. And oil, again, makes the world go round. And to quote a group who I like of Hilltop Hoods is, we go to war for oil that gives us oil for war. We have a few things. We had one of the major concerns is that the oil markets aren't red yesterday and today. What do you mean that's a concern that it's not red? Well, they're green. So the price per barrel, whether it's crude, Brent, Urals, etc., is deeply green. The reason why that is of such concern, especially yesterday, was the International Energy Agency, the IEA. They released 400 million barrels of oil, saturating the market to get more supply on the market to try and reduce demand, try and decrease the price. Because if you want to bring down the price of something, you need to pump more of it on. Over 170, I think 176 from memory, million barrels of that is from the US reserves. And currently, that is 42%, I think 41.6% of the US reserve that this has been put onto the markets. Now, this doesn't mean that they're running out. What it means is when these massive reserves, they're getting dumped onto the market and the market is still going up. That is of massive concern. And some countries are cashing in on this, with Financial Times today reporting that Russia is making an extra $150 million day on day, and that will be increasing as the price per barrel starts skyrocketing.
Yeah, so we mentioned last time we discussed this, and it continues to be the case, that Russia is benefiting for this in a financial sense. Certainly not what Ukraine or the EU wanted with the oil sanctions. So this certainly runs counter to that objective and that course of action. Sean Fu actually is a YouTuber, but he's a Singapore-based financial analyst. Talked about this just recently with the US Strategic Petroleum Reserve had already been run down a significant amount during Biden presidency,
300 million barrels they released.
Had not been topped up. And now from as you talked about, there's about 400 just over, and they're about to put another 170 out into the market. This continues to draw down on the US's Strategic Petroleum Reserve. So that's extremely important, because you can't just then turn on the switch and refill the reserve, because you're going to be competing with the globe for all of this oil. So that'll take a long time to replenish the US petroleum reserve. And we also have Japan releasing some, which is very important for it, because it imports 95% of its oil. Now, while it does have a lot, over 200 days worth, it really needs to make sure it maintains a very high level of reserve. So that's going to be a major concern for Japan and South Korea. But this is a sugar hit, as I think you're alluding to.
Yeah, and the concern is that this sugar hit hasn't had the desired effect. We had, of course, that massive wave up to $120 a barrel. We saw it come down to maybe 86. We saw this release onto the market, and then it's still rising. And last time I looked before this interview, it's midday on the 14th, it was still green. I think it was 4% green today at about $103. And backfilling those oil reserves, even just what the US released, and it was already run down, is, from my research, absolutely at best it would take 18 months, potentially far longer, especially with the oil situation globally at the moment. And that will, of course, continue having a lot of flow-on effect, because as you and I and people on this channel, we're part of the very top percentile of interest in this war. If you've sat here for an hour of listening to a strategic discussion, most people and most voters, their main concerns is filling up at the Bowser, price of groceries. And of course, filling up at the Bowser has gone up massively in Australia in the past 2 weeks, if not ration. And therefore, food is moved primarily by a diesel truck. That starts increasing as well. And this is what really influences how the majority of people will actually view this war.
Just on that point, for your Australian audience, the getting back to the fertiliser, about 65% of Australia's fertiliser imports come from the Gulf. So you've touched on that, but that just shows how significant. About 2/3 of Australia's fertiliser imports come from the Gulf.
Absolutely. Now, the last points that I have, and you may have others, but we are aware these videos always drag on. We planned for half an hour and we're an hour in, is I think that the rhetoric, the messaging, the optics coming out of America especially, and we'll just include Israel in that, the rhetoric of death, destruction, surrender, that rhetoric is increasing. It's gone from this sort of highly analytical, this is what could happen, this military, to this kill 'em all style wording. And what we actually do know from, it's back here, but you can look it up, it's where my finger's pointing. Go and look at Rand 2010, Victory Has 1,000 Fathers. When you have this sort of destroy them style rhetoric, it is actually one of the worst indicators for winning a war like this. It's one of the worst indicators when you look at when this rhetoric has been used versus the outcome of the 32 conflicts we investigate on that. Very bad correlation for winning a war. We're seeing far more of this, and I think that tells me a lot about the level of flat spin, but you're not going to be able to use that language to win. That language is not going to win a war. It's going to do the opposite. It will cement support. And I'm sure everyone has seen we've won. Like, Trump has already basically declared we've won. The unconditional surrender will destroy them. And even in this tweet today, or this truth today, that Iran has no ability to affect anything, There is nothing they can do about it. They will never have a weapon. They will never have the ability to threaten, and they're wise to lay down their arms, what's left of their country. Otherwise, everything will be destroyed. And Pentagon saying with Trump earlier, Trump saying, we're totally destroying them. Let's watch what happens. Quote, I'm killing them. What a great honor to do. We're seeing that language start increasing. I think that tells me a lot about the current situation viewing this. You've worked in shaping and influencing. What is your take on all of this?
Yeah, very much try to convince the public and those politicians, and not just the US public, this is both a domestic and international audience, that yes, the US, is on track, we're achieving our objectives, everything is going to plan, and the rhetoric needs to be increased because they can't show the evidence on the ground. Yes, they can do briefings, we've blown up all of this and all of that, the Air Force, the Navy, but they still haven't achieved the goal, which is regime change, or for Israel, total regime collapse. And the international economic situation is deteriorating. And as we said before, even if it stops tomorrow, it'll be 4 weeks at least before things start to approach normal. So I think there's a concern that the public opinion and the opinion of political leaders who don't get access to, not like the Gang of Eight who in the US Congress, who get the highly classified briefings, and international domestic audiences and international politicians must be told and must be led to believe that the US is on track and everything is going according to a plan. The more this rhetoric happens and the more they increase both the volume and the rhetoric, the hyperbole, then the more it indicates to me that things are not going well.
Yeah, I completely agree on that assessment, and I think we'll see significantly more of it. And that tweet concerned me the other day when it was there's groups and targets we haven't even considered targeting yet, and it concerns me there. But it also, when you say about it's going to take 4 weeks to things even get back to normal, and that's 4 weeks from the end of it. So it's not 4 weeks from today, it's 4 weeks from if it ended today. I can't see these Gulf states not trying to basically have some level of like reparation against America. It has cost these Gulf states astronomical figures in gas and oil and tourism, etc. But it's further than that. The Gulf may have been destroyed. Like, I can tell you right now, if the war ended tomorrow and my partner said I'm flying to Europe and I'm going to go through Doha Airport or DXB, I'd say maybe go through Singapore or maybe go through X, Y, or Z. I think the image that these states took decades to build has been massively eroded away. And of course, we've seen this absolute Achilles heel of that Strait of Hormuz starts making countries look for, or maybe we'll buy more oil from over here that doesn't have to pass through that. Maybe we'll look at renewables, and we do know China has the absolute chokehold on all renewables, not only for their own electricity, but for export of that. I think that these Gulf states, I can't see them being happy whatsoever, because as much as Trump or Netanyahu would like to say they started this, and has it as a defensive operation, no one sees it like that. Everyone sees who dropped the first bomb. So that's going to be a huge consideration moving on.
So you talk about reparations. Iran has said they will seek reparations for what's happened to it. Interesting that you ask about or suggest that the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, might look for reparations from the US. That's interesting. What certainly I think the Gulf countries and others, Iraq of course not really is, but Jordan, which isn't, might start to look at what faith can they put in US security guarantees, and South Korea, and taking that further to even South Korea, because we've got the removal of THAADs and potentially Patriots. So this will, not only from that economic sense, but also the use of might is right, law of the jungle from the US. How are allies going to view the US going forward in terms of security guarantees that the US gives to them?
Absolutely. And look at Ukraine, and look at the rhetoric given to Ukraine over the former administration of however long, whatever it takes, level rhetoric. versus a new administration comes in and well, the Europeans can buy our weapons, but we won't even make them available to send. I think Kissinger said it well when he said, to be an enemy is dangerous, to be a friend is fatal.
And how many column inches is an old phrase, but how much do we see Ukraine mentioned in the media now?
Yeah, zero. Zero. And of course, this has huge flow-on effect. If Ukraine can't get any bloody air defense from this, Ukraine's drone operators are moving here to fight then Shahed drones, so they're not going to be in Ukraine to protect facilities, and Russia's making at least 150 million extra on top per day. That Russia's budget previously needed just a barrel price of $56, and I actually believe that was downgraded, and now it's around 100, say. I don't have the graph in front of me, so extremely far above this. And not only that, Russian oil will be more attractive in the future to states because they go, well, it doesn't have to go through this absolute choke, like world choke point of the Strait. Mate, is there anything that we haven't covered today? I know we've covered a lot. My notes are an absolute bloody mess over here. Is there anything we haven't covered that you've got down?
Yes, one on the political economic side. Many people may not know, but China is actually a major exporter of refined petroleum products. So they import a lot, but they do actually export a lot of refined petroleum products, gasoline, diesel, aviation fuel. They have put an immediate ban on the export of refined petroleum products. They are a major refiner. They do bring a lot in and then refine and then on-sell the refined product, but they have banned exports. That is significant.
Yeah,
now, in terms of Australia, we get 90% of Australia's refined oil products are imported. Only have a very small domestic capability. Now, most of that's from Singapore, Malaysia, and South Korea, but still, the market for refined products is there's less supply and there's still at least the same demand. So that I think is pretty important.
Yeah, especially on that aviation fuel. I know that went in more recently than the other refined diesel, petrol, but that aviation fuel, that can have huge effect. I know Australia was still buying aviation fuel that was being refined from Russia because of the choke point on that type of fuel, even given the sanctions against Russia. So that's going to be a huge problem with China not exporting that globally.
And Australia now has provided air-to-air missiles, the AIM-120 AMRAAM, to the UAE. People might say, oh, that doesn't necessarily mean Australia's involved. But with the deployment of airborne early warning aircraft, the Wedgetail, that means Australia is a participant in this. Even though it's going to be used, they say, for defensive purposes, that's an airborne radar and electronic warfare collection aircraft. Whatever it picks up, it can send to anybody, not just the UAE, the US. It could be any side getting that and then using it in an offensive manner.
Absolutely. Mate, well, I know Pete Hegseth again tried to say it's just the media saying that more and more people are getting involved in this war. He says it's not expanding, it's constricting. And I vehemently disagree with his position that this war is constricting down and not expanding outwards. And I think we could see it expand outwards much further before we get guns falling silent.
Oh, absolutely. And there's an old saying, which I'll paraphrase because I can't remember the exact words, but victory has 100 fathers, but defeat is an orphan.
Absolutely. Mate, again, the links to your channel will be below. I do implore everyone to go and have a look, have a watch. You do some fantastic stuff, and you and I will be back in a couple of days with another strategic level update.
Always lots happening.
Mate, thank you very much.
Thanks, Willie.
Bye. Thank you, CyberGhost, for sponsoring this video. Stay private, stay secure, and unlock global content. Get CyberGhost VPN now for 84% off and 4 months for free. It's risk-free, 45-day money-back guarantee. Click the link in the description and start protecting your digital life today.